Thinking about space, time, and black holes at Princeton University. Welcome back to Techstination. I'm Fred Fishkin, and with me is Dr. Lia Medeiros, an astrophysicist here who has been part of a team that has produced an image of the M87 black hole with help from an algorithm that she wrote called Primo. Thank you so much for taking the time with us, and I hope my description is close to being correct.
Yes, that was all completely correct, and thank you so much for having me. I'm having a wonderful time getting to know you today.
Well, you've been through a really terrific presentation and discussion here with a group of young students, high school and pre-high school, part of a Summer of a Lifetime program here, and that is something that you're really drawn to, it seems.
Yeah, it's something I really genuinely enjoy and always kind of throughout my career have really gone out of my way to do that. I really enjoy interacting with teenagers. I feel like everybody gives teenagers a really bad rep. I think they're amazing and incredible, and I'm always excited and awe-inspired after having interacted with him. There's so much possibility in that age group. You know, they're just starting out their life and they can really do anything. So I always really appreciated, every opportunity I've had to interact with that age group. And I really, specifically, I want the young women to know, right, that, there are women in this field, that is a possibility for them, that is achievable and accessible for them.
That's interesting. Tell me what your experience has been as a woman in this field that traditionally has been male-dominated.
Yeah, so the way that I usually like to answer that question is specifically thinking about the young women who might be listening to this podcast and listening to this answer. And so I will be speaking to them when I say this. What I like to tell, any young woman who is considering coming into this field is that I'm not going to say that it's going to be a piece of cake. I'm not going to say that you'll never have any issues, that nothing will ever go wrong, and nobody will ever treat you differently because you're a woman. That would not be fair. What I will say, though, is that almost every woman that I know in the field, in one way or another, is an activist. And what I mean by that is we care about making this environment as good as it can be for the next generation. We care so deeply about you, the young women who maybe are listening to this, and we want to make your experience better than ours. And so you will come into a field that, sure, you might be a minority. You'll probably at some point in your life be in a room that you might be the only woman there. But what you'll also be joining is kind of an underground network of really awesome women supporting other women and kind of cheering you on throughout your journey. And I think that there's been several women who have mentored me and kind of cheered me on at different stages in my career that I've always really appreciated. And it's always made a really huge difference. And so I think that I've been trying to pay that forward and trying to be that for the next generation as much as I can. But I'm certainly not alone. There pretty much everybody, all my friends in the field that are also women, I think feel very similarly, that we go out of our way to, help and support those that come after us.
What was it? Was there anything in particular that ignited this kind of thinking, this kind of curiosity for you?
Well, yes and no. So I think that I've always kind of been curious. I think that another reason why I do tend to do a lot of outreach is that I'm very aware that my particular upbringing was quite privileged in many ways. My father is a professor, and so I knew what it meant to be a scientist from a very early age, and I always understood what that meant practically, right? What the day-to-day life of a scientist was. And it always seemed accessible to me because I knew that we shared at least half of our genes, right? So if he could do it, I could probably do it, right? And so I think that was part of it, is that it always did feel accessible and achievable and kind of a reasonable enough path to take. But another aspect of it was that I moved around quite a bit as a kid, partly because my dad was an academic. So we moved for his PhD, we moved for postdocs and so forth. And I realized at a very early age that math was the same in every country. And that was something that was really important to me early on. And so I really focused on math because I knew that no matter where we moved to next, it would still be the same. And so my time would not be wasted. And so it's kind of a combination of, having accessibility and exposure to science and scientific curiosity, but also having, a deep passion for math and more kind of STEM fields from a pretty early age.
Now, tough question, I suppose, but you've addressed this. You've been at the Institute for Advanced Studies, Einstein's place, and here at Princeton. Tell me, there's an image that anybody in this field, when you say astrophysicist, the connotation is kind of genius. One of the things that you're interested in is kind of broadening the scope of this, making it more accessible to us mere mortals.
Yeah, this is a really good point. So this is something that I was just chatting with some of the students about, actually. So this is something that I always, that I really do believe, but I also really try to emphasize when I'm talking to the younger generation, because I think that you do need to have a passion for this. You do need to, be willing to learn the math, right? Like if you are not willing to put in the time to learn the math and you hate math, it can be quite hard to be in this field. That being said, though, what I really worry about happening with this idea of you must be a genius to be a physicist is that a young person can be quite smart and might not even realize that they're quite smart because maybe they haven't had the same opportunities as somebody else. Or maybe they just, for whatever reason, don't have as high of self-esteem as somebody else, because being a teenager is really hard, especially this, in this day and age with social media and all of that, right? And so part of the issue is I really don't think you need to be a genius. I don't think of myself as a genius. I struggle with stuff all the time, right? Physics is an incredibly humbling experience, I think, for everyone. But the other part of that is that young people, I don't think, have a fair view of their own abilities quite frequently. And so if we're saying that you need to be a genius, really smart young people might not think that they are smart enough, because even though they are quite smart and would be totally fine, they might not, think of themselves as being smart enough. Does that make sense? So I think that we're not selecting, by saying that you need to be a genius to be in this field, you're not actually selecting for the smartest people. You're selecting for the people that think of themselves as geniuses, and those are not necessarily the same as the smartest people. Does that make sense? Is that our self-image is not necessarily accurate with respect to that. But also the other aspect of this is, as I just said, right, I really don't think that you need to be a genius. I don't think that I am a genius in any way. I think you need to be willing to put in the work. I think you need to be really willing to work quite hard. There will be things that you will struggle with. There's things that all of us have struggled with. There are many different aspects of being a scientist, right? Like part of it is also being able to encourage and mentor and motivate your students, right? And being able to communicate about your science, right? Being able to teach, being able to be creative, being able to deal with the interpersonal relations of, the fact that most of the really large-scale projects are done in really big groups of people, right? So there's really large collaboration. So much of our work is, dealing with the fact that science is a human endeavor, right? So there's so many different aspects, and I think that, the media has kind of put, especially physics and astrophysics, on a pedestal that we really don't deserve. And, it's not that our work isn't amazing, right? But a lot of what we do, right? Like I debug code, right? So many people spend their day debugging code, right? I read and I write. So many people spend their day reading and writing, right? It's a really cool problem. Black holes are super cool. Space is amazing, right? But I'm sure there are many people that could be doing what I'm doing just as well, who, went through their life thinking that they couldn't.
You seem to make the black holes even more super cool the way you explain it to the kids. Fascinated by what happens if you fall into a black hole, getting spaghettified. There was kind of listening to the kids, it was like Shark Week. Are you going to be torn up? So.
Yep. They, what I have learned in my many years of talking to teens and kids about black holes is it can sometimes be useful to just lean into the really morbid stuff. You have to be very careful to make sure that nobody's going to actually get stressed or lose sleep over this. And I always try to be very clear that no humans have ever actually been harmed by a black hole. But it really does seem that at least a non-negligible percentage of the kids and teens really, really enjoy hearing about, asking questions about, and thinking about the really morbid aspects of what would happen if a human ever encountered a black hole.
So here we are going about our everyday lives, debating politics, what kinds of things we want to buy, how to earn money to buy them. Why is learning, understanding about all of this, about black holes, why is it important?
Really good question. So I have two answers to that. I have one answer that is more of a personal answer, and the other is what I would say to, Congress, let's say, right? Not that I would be the one saying anything to Congress, but still.
Someday.
Well, so the more personal one is, I think that there are many different aspects of why humans study the universe. And one of the things that's really kind of stuck out to me that makes me really happy that this is the career that I've personally chosen is that when you look at the most ancient civilizations, the Mayans, the Aztecs, so forth, they all looked up at the sky and tried to understand it. We've been doing astronomy since the very beginning of human civilization. It's always been a part of us, right? It's always been a part of the human experience in one way or another. And there's something that, to me personally, is really awe-inspiring to think that we are carrying on that tradition, right? That no matter what's happened throughout the entire history of human civilization, we as humans have always agreed that it was important to understand our place in the universe and understand how the universe works. And I think that that's a really kind of noble endeavor of trying to understand that. And I also think that there's something really beautiful about the fact that on the larger scale, it really does bring things into perspective. When you look at, the universe, we are all humans on this tiny, tiny speck, right? The differences between countries and ethnicities and political views and all of that, right? It's so small when we think about how small and insignificant the entire solar system really is on this larger scale. So I think that it's something that we're not saving lives, obviously, but it's something that we as a society have kind of systematically always agreed was important since the very beginning. It's kind of the sense of wonder, the sense of trying to understand and trying to move forward the total, human knowledge for knowledge's sake, that I think is really intrinsically human in a really kind of beautiful way. So anyway, so that's the personal one. But that's not necessarily what I would say if I was trying to get a grant. What I would say, though, maybe if I was trying to actually get funding for this, is that when we are doing fundamental science, which so much of what I do is motivated by fundamental science because I'm trying to test gravity, right? So I'm using a black hole as a laboratory to test gravity. And so I consider that fundamental science, which is to understand one of the most fundamental laws of the universe, the law that governs how gravity works, right? So we're trying to understand that. And when we do fundamental science, it is incredibly hard to predict what the practical implications will be to day-to-day human life, N years down the road, right? So when Einstein was coming up with his theory of general relativity, for example, he, I'm sure, did not imagine how it would be useful in our day-to-day life. And most humans nowadays do not think about general relativity and do not think that it is practically useful in our day-to-day life. But it actually is in many ways. So, for example, GPS would not be possible if we had not understood general relativity, because the errors that you need to make GPS work are so small that the deviation between the theory of general relativity and Newton's theory of gravity is significant enough that GPS would not have worked if we still only knew about Newton's laws and did not know about general relativity. But you could not have predicted that when you were coming up with the theory, right? And so pushing the boundaries of human knowledge fundamentally can be a very good thing to do practically, right? You never know what's going to come from that, right? Quantum mechanics is another wonderful example of that, right? So much in our daily lives actually does depend on understanding quantum mechanics, right? Technology, chemistry, like so much of that actually comes from a deeper understanding of quantum mechanics. But again, that was fundamental science, right? Fundamental physics, that at the time they weren't really sure, what would come from that, right? And so when you are learning more about the universe and learning more about physics itself, it's very hard to predict how that's going to affect practically humans down the line.
Tell me what your thoughts are about this new world of AI that seems to be taking over everything, and I guess the quantum computing coming, and things seem to be changing pretty rapidly.
Okay,
and
so
how is that going to help what you do?
Yeah, so I have a very particular answer to a lot of this. So the first thing I will say is that a lot of what AI and machine learning is based on is relatively simple linear algebra that we've known about for quite some time. And so I think that we, as physicists or even mathematicians or astronomers or kind of, the STEM science math world, we've been using these equations and doing and developing algorithms with these equations for quite some time. And yes, there is obvious improvement, but to me, it feels less like a cliff and more as a steady slope, if that makes sense, right?
It's still being coded these days, right? It's not doing it on its own.
Yeah, at least the stuff that I interact with is not doing it on its own, although I have played with some stuff that will comment your code for you really nicely, and that was amazing. So that I'm all for, because commenting code is not the fun part of making code. And so anyway, so I feel like it's less drastic of a change when you've kind of seen the building blocks of it for quite some time. And for me personally, with Primo, one of the things that I really love about Primo is that it's actually quite simple. And that was by design and something that I'm actually really proud of. So when Primo got a lot of media coverage, it was really focused on, this is an AI algorithm. And I actually pushed back on that a little bit. Because it's just a dictionary learning algorithm. And I'm using equations that have been around for quite some time. I want to be respectful of the machine learning community, and I've had many people in that community say that I should be calling it machine learning to give proper credit to that community, and I'm happy to do that. But I personally don't call it AI. I think that that's too much. It's too simple for that. And I think that, there's two sides of this, right? One is that the simple stuff is still quite powerful and you can still do a lot with fairly simple algorithms. And the other side of that is that, machine learning is amazing, but it's not magic, right? It's still equations and algorithms and programming, right? It's still the same building blocks that we've been using for decades, and it's incredible and it's so exciting and we're all very excited and impressed by it. But it's not this kind of crazy magic nebulous thing that has come out of nowhere.
Well, there's still clearly so much to come. You're just getting started, right? So
yeah.
Where can people go to follow all that you're doing?
So I do have a website. It's liamedeiros.com. I also do have a Twitter. I'm not very active on Twitter, and sorry about that. But if you want to follow me on Twitter, I do try to post something when there's like a really big, exciting result. But that's pretty infrequent. The website might still be kind of the easiest way. There's a bunch of links to talks and things like that as well on there.
Well, congratulations on all of your accomplishments. The website again is liamedeiros.com. Thanks for spending time with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.